Across the wide and lonesome prairie, the Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell, pages 93 to 100, written by Kristiana Gregory, read by Christina Grieve. Next day, Ben's arm is healing. Pa made a new splint so it's easier for Ben to move. The other good news is that Wade is back to telling jokes. The only problems left over from the hemlock is that his tongue is numb on the right side and his jaws ache. Tall Joe says he probably didn't eat very much of it. Ma says it's a miracle from God. That's all there is to it. A miracle. Mrs. Big called me over this morning before we pulled out from Fort Bridger. As she folded the blankets into a crate, she said, "Hattie, Mr. Big's cart is missing. Someone took it in the night." At noon, I helped Mrs. Big make a search of camp. She is so large that her steps are slow. The first wagon we went to was the Kankas. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mrs. Kanka said, "and how dare you accuse us? We're just poor old people. Besides, I'm not feeling well, and neither is my husband. Maybe everyone would like it if we just plumb keeled over and die before we get to Oregon. Maybe you'd be happy then." Mrs. Big held up her hand. "That's enough," she said. "You go back to your nap, Mrs. Kanker. Sorry to bother you." When we were out of hearing distance, I said, "If Mrs. Kank is so innocent, why does she make excuses for herself, and why ain't she upset to hear someone stole Mr. Biggs's cart?" "Hattie, if she is a thief, then soon enough she'll make a mistake, and folks will find her out. It's not like she can leave town or hide." Mrs. Big rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Just be patient, honey." Afternoon. After a long pull up a creek called the Muddy, we've come to the Bear River. There's a beautiful campsite with a trail coming in from the right. A piece of paper was nailed to a tree. Tall Joe read it first, then passed it around. "They made it, folks," he shouted. "The other wagons made it. Crossed the desert and just a few days ahead of us, seems like." Cheers went up. Our horses, mules, oxen, and cattle are grazing along the broad river bottom. It is the most peaceful sight. Groups of men are fishing, or sitting in the sun, or exploring the meadow. There is the sound of children splashing and playing along the river. The women are spreading wash clothes on the bushes, also sitting in the sun and talking and resting. Some are busy over cooking fires. Now, it's not just Ma and Aunt June and Mrs. Anderson talking about going no further. For several other families are discussing the very same thing. Why not settle here in Bear River Valley? At supper, 5 families made an announcement. This place suits them so well they've decided to homestead. Said they'd not seen finer farm land, ever. But Pa wants to keep going. He is so set on Oregon and living by the Pacific Ocean. He can't think of anything else. Pa said he's had too many dreams that were lost or forgotten, or that he just gave up on. This is our last chance, Augusta, to fulfill a dream as big as Oregon. Please stand by me. I need you." Ma says all she dreams of is keeping her family safe. As for me, my dream is that Peppa and I will always be friends, and that I will someday be adored by a husband I love. And maybe Peppa and I can still live next door to each other. So we're on the trail again. 10 days from Fort Hall. Sheep Rock. One side of Sheep Rock raises up like a stone wall. Pine trees surround it on all sides, and among the cliffs are mountain sheep. Tall Joe said that back in '42, John C. Fremont explored this place and named it Sheep Rock. We're still on the Bear River. It's the same beautiful green as Peppa's eyes and Wade's. When we saw how deep it was, we were relieved to learn it makes a sharp turn south, and we don't have to go across it. Tall Joe says it empties into the Great Salt Lake. He followed it once. An amazing sight has made us all want to camp for several days. There are pools bubbling up with hot water. There's even one with a geyser called Steamboat, because somehow it makes a high-pitched whistling that sounds like a boat on the Missouri. Hearing it made me so homesick, I almost started bawling. Folks are swimming and floating in the warm water and drinking it. To me, it smells like eggs on the rotten side, but the taste ain't bad at all. Wade and Gideon dared each other to sit on the geyser. They took turns, and oh, what an event, while Peppa and I watched from the banks. Gideon swam out to the center and waited. Soon enough, heavy bubbles began lifting him up and up. His arms and legs waved like a turtle on its back as the geyser bounced him up and down. By the time it stopped, Gideon had lost his shirt. Wade rode the geyser next and lost his pants, which caused folks to erupt in hilarious laughter. And so the day went. I was so pleased to have Peppa to myself all afternoon. We lay in the grass and stared up at the clouds, and I asked her what it was like to have a husband. After a long while, she turned her face toward me. How pretty she looked, her green eyes and cheeks high with color. "Oh, Hattie, you are such a dear. Marriage is, well, it's the most wonderful of wonderfuls. Someday you'll understand." I wish Peppa would tell me exactly what she means. What it's really, truly like to be loved by a man. Later, at supper, Ma stirred several cups of sugar and a pint of raspberries into a pail of mineral water. Mrs. Biggs did the same with the citrus syrup to make lemonade, and they was the most delicious bubbly drinks any of us had ever tasted. Peppa and I drank so much, though, we were not hungry for supper, and I had a stomach ache all night long. She told me the next day she did too. Tall Joe said one of the pools was named Beer Spring because mountain men swear they get drunk after a few sips. But Pa says that's likely just another tall tale before bed. Jake and Ben complained and pushed at each other all day. They argued with me when I said it was time to unroll their blankets. I'm tired of being their sister. 2 days later. 2 days north of the Soda Springs, the sky turned black and the air cold. In an instant, a wind picked up so fierce I had to hold my bonnet on with my hands, even though it was tied under my... Yes, even though it was tied under my chin. My skirt blew back so tight it looked like I was wearing men's trousers. When the hail hit, we stopped the wagons and ran for cover. The poor animals moaned and cried, but there was no way we could protect them. It felt like someone was pelting us with rocks. In an instant, my arms and neck were bruised. The hailstones bounced like popping corn, and soon the ground was white. Many of the wagon tops, ours included, ended up with holes. The storm passed as quick as it had started and flooded the roads so much that the mud sucked at the wheels as we pulled out. It was our turn to lead. Because of the storm, we thought nothing of the abandoned wagon we came upon. Its cover also had holes, but when Tall Joe came back from inspecting, his face told us a different story. "Folks, those ain't holes. Those holes ain't from hailstones," Tall Joe said. He held up an arrow with feathers on its end. Quick as you please, the men began searching in case someone from the wagon was left behind. The Indians had stole the mules and whatever treasures possible, for there was a trail of scattered goods. Wade and Gideon made a gruesome discovery. About 200 yards away, inside a thicket of sagebrush, was a pair of feet sticking out of a grave. Men's, we think, because they were big with hairy toes. It seems that after he was buried, the Indians came back and dug deep enough to steal his boots. Then left him, just like we found him. I thought it couldn't have been Pa if we'd taken that shortcut. My stomach felt tight, thinking Indians might be watching us, and that they might not be friendly. There was some talk about digging up the poor fella to see who he was, but Tall Joe said it wouldn't be pretty, that's for sure. And we'll likely find out when we get to Fort Hall, just a few days north. He and Pa shoveled dirt to cover the man's feet, and we piled rocks on top to keep animals away. It was a solemn group that pulled out. Peppa and I and Wade walked together next to the wagon Gideon was driving. We watched the horizon more and wondered what will happen if we see Indians. This is a land of sagebrush and rock, much of it black. Tall Joe says it's from the volcanoes and that the western part of the continent is full of them, old ones that don't erupt no more. Our animals plow hard and slow, they're plumb wore out. Tall Joe rides back and forth among the wagons, ordering folks to lighten their loads again. Some families pile belongings neatly to the side of the trail. Others heave things out, letting them land wherever. I keep my eye on Mrs. Kanka, but she has not thrown anything away. 2 of her oxen dropped dead yesterday, 1 today, so now there are 3 pulling. Tall Joe warned her again. We'll leave you behind, madam, you and your junk and your husband. Better start tossing. Every day there are at least 2 animals to butcher, either cows, horses, or oxen. What meat we don't eat, the women cut into strips for jerky. We hang them from the hoops inside our wagons, and the dry air toughens them pretty quickly. The layers of dust seem to keep the flies and yellow jackets away.